Hi, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Doyle. And there's some things I got to say. Last time we talked about social media and sort of some of the impacts and some of the behaviors and some of the uh, results, the outcomes, things like that result from the proliferation of social media and the substitution of social media for direct human communication. One of the points I wanted to begin with now is sort of where we left it off. You had made a profound statement of declaration that part of what we're experiencing and seeing is people are substituting emotions and emotional reactions for facts. And you went on to say that a civil society is based upon several principles, but one of which is that we all agree that there are immutable and irrefutable facts, things that exist. And I think a simple example is up is always up, down is always down. Yes is always yes, no is always no. Now, how we interpret them and how we apply them, that's different. But I mean, you can't say that, well, up is up today and down tomorrow, or it's up for me and it's down for you. It's universal to a certain extent. And in hearing you say that, it was a profound epiphany for me, because it really explained a lot of the illogical actions and behaviors that I think I've witnessed on social media and even now in individual interactions. I think it has bled over from social media into interpersonal interactions where people are talking to one another, and the loudest is who wins, sort of a thing, rather than a rational discussion of facts and right and wrong and logic and conclusions drawn from those factors. And it's a little unsettling. And I think from a personal perspective, I admit that I'm a passionate and emotional person at times. And it's very likely that in the vast majority, if not the entirety of cases where I become more emotional, I tend to be less logical. And it becomes a win-lose scenario. And I think that is the real problem, is that the emotion, basing things on emotion rather than fact, tends to only have an outcome of win-lose, right? I mean, for me to win, you got to lose. And if you win, then I lose. Even if that's not really the case, that's the emotional state that I think is generated from that. Does that make sense to you, or do you think that's relevant? That's real. It's makes sense in what you've observed.
I think there's a lot of things to unpack with that. I think broadly, I agree with the statements and characterizations that you've made here. I think that the problem is that we look at these situations from our own perspective. When I say we, I don't mean just you and me. I mean any of us, right? No matter what our beliefs are, our ideals are, our guiding principles, or lack thereof. I think that being individuals and having a subjective experience is inseparable from how one understands the world. I think that's just logically deducible as well, because the only way that we understand the world is through the apparata that we are, right? And that in and of itself is going to determine the information you get, or the data that you get, and then how it becomes information in your brain. This is something I said, I think, either last episode or the previous episode, probably last episode, where information is not information until it goes through a filter, right? It's just data until that point. And that filter is what's important. And so we as humans, our body, our physical body even, is a filter. So how we see something, like literally how we see it physically, depends on our eyes, depends on our brain, depends on a lot of different things. Same with hearing, touch, all that. So my point being is that when we come in the presence of an occurrence, let's just say something that happens, or a reading about something that happened in the past, regardless, it doesn't matter. We're going to come to understanding and interpreting that event through a whole lot of individualized perspective. One, in what knowledge we have of that event, particularly in similar events maybe in the past. Two, our ability to just cognitively process that. Three, our ability to emotionally process that, because that's part of the deal too. And then four, our ability to synthesize. And so that's taking all of this input from different sources, different ways, emotional, physical, etc., logical, etc., and putting that together to build a picture of what we understand this thing to be. So I go through all of this. It sounds like I'm going all the way around the world to answer your question. But the problem is that's very difficult to do. People always, forever in time, always will underestimate how difficult that is to do. Because for some people it's really easy to do, but it's still very difficult for those people. So much more difficult for those who can't do that easily. And thus, I think what happens is for people to want to feel relevant to the world, to society, to anything outside of themselves, they have to adopt shortcuts on that synthesis process, right? And the way that they do that is a bunch of different ways. Religion's one of those ways. Ideology is one of those ways. Whatever occurs to me first is one of those ways, right? Just a process, right? So a process can be one of those ways that people resolve that disconnect between the effort required to really synthesize an understanding about something and wanting to have an understanding at a moment's notice, because that's how our world is. It works really, really fast, and you have to respond immediately. So over time, that's given rise to a lot of these frameworks that how people view the world, and as shortcuts, so that they don't have to go through all of that synthesis every single time an event happens. It's an abstraction process. Well, we've had several of those, and the biggest one in human history, in my opinion, the most important one in human history, in my opinion, and the most valuable one in human history, in my opinion, is the Enlightenment, where the way that framework of understanding the world comes from is that we agree on several things, and that's what you're talking about. What you're talking about are the Enlightenment values, right? That there is objective truth. We can move ourselves toward knowing more and more of what that objective truth is. Whether we can know it fully or not, that's irrelevant. We can move to a place better than where we are right now. That's what's relevant. Closer to it than we are right now. That's what's relevant. And so that has developed over hundreds of years, right, at this point, into an extremely and exceedingly complex society that has created a lot of interesting things. Wealth. It's created, leisure time. What the heck was leisure time in the past? It's created so many things that people take for granted and understanding when they try to think about and understand human life, to the point where familiarity breeds contempt. And so this wonderful life and system that we have and things that we work with has grown contempt in people, because they don't have the inherent meaning in life, the inherent purpose in life for what to drive toward, because everything's so instant and easy and no barrier. So what life is no challenge, right? And some of them, it's life is an overwhelming challenge because they believe that it should be like that, and it's not like that, right? And so this contempt of the system has given rise to newer frameworks of interpreting the world and approaching the world that are at huge odds with Enlightenment values. because in fact they reject the fundamental basis of Enlightenment values. And so what you have on that side is similar sorts of structures, religion, all this other kind of stuff, right? So, but the religion looks very different. A religion born of these alternative structures looks very different than the religion born of like Enlightenment structures. I guess all the way around the world to say, yes, what's happening is that some of these alternative frameworks are causing people to be dogmatic. And their dogma isn't the truth. Their dogma is how they feel. That is my truth, right? My truth is my dogma. And the problem with that is the problem that you identified at the beginning is that that's basically saying that, well, for you, up is up, but for me, down is up. We can't do that and have any kind of conversation. Literally, you cannot have a conversation if that is how the frame of the conversation is. And so that's what we're having is a evolution of understanding and adapting oneself to the world. The problem is that one of those systems works and one of those is very unlikely to work. We've seen a lot of evidence of why one of those systems, a lot of evidence why a lot of the Enlightenment value systems do work and these other systems don't work. Communism, right? Fascism, all of these like really extreme sort of political structures that can show up because of some of these things are the case. But even there's stuff beyond that, right? This whole thing where people are trying to go back to might makes right, but the might isn't my fist in your face. The might is my voice against yours. We're fighting a meta war in that sense. And all of this is a meta war in that sense. It's not we're duking it out. It's we're shouting at each other. The problem is you can't shout somebody into a submission, or can you, right? That's really the thesis that's being tested right now, I think, is can you shout somebody into a submission? And I see that from my perspective, we're starting to see that in some ways it is effective. It can be effective. And it is no less dangerous. Mark my words, it's no less dangerous than me coming at you with my fist.
Well,
in fact, it may be more dangerous.
Probably more. I was going to say it is probably more dangerous because the coming at someone with your fist or physically, that's healable if it's not fatal, right? I mean, it will. People can recover and heal from that. But the kinds of
it's also a resolution. It's at least a resolution too. If I knock you out, you're not going to stop me from doing what I want to do at that point. You're out cold. I'm going to do what I want to do. The problem. Right. The problem with the shout down method is that all that does in the popular sphere, you win, right? And you have control. And then you drive everything underground, and everything you drive underground gets 1,000,000 times more radicalized because of that. And you create a hellscape on this earth by doing that. People just don't understand that that's what's going on. Is they literally are creating a hellscape in the guise of trying to save us from hell, in their self-fashioned hell. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional about this because I feel very deeply about this topic.
No, I think that's fine. No, I understand because I think you are describing it in a psychosocial manner that makes a lot of sense to me. That's giving some clarity to my observations, or at least clarity of understanding of the things that I have witnessed and seen and heard. And I mean, we all have, but you know, you scratch your head. I do, going, why? I mean, why are people doing this? And your explanation here is a good social psycho or you know, psychosocial, whichever. It's the individual inside the behavior inside the group. Social psychology was what my course was called in college years ago, where you study the behavior of individuals in groups. And I think that's what we're witnessing is that it is a means and a method to an end, right? And the end, as you said, I think has been demonstrated historically to not have a high likelihood of success. In fact, it has an extremely high likelihood of abject failure, according to history, right? I mean,
failure's putting it nicely. It's complete human catastrophe and misery, suffering. You know, endless death, endless woe. There are no words to describe the I have to go back to the word hell. It is just literal hell on earth that enacts, from my perspective. Not my perspective. This is truth. This is provable fact. You can look at history and point to it. And I'll stop there.
So I think, well, without getting too political, but I think some of the things we're witnessing in this country, in the United States, I think are sort of demonstrating that, right? You look at what's been going on up in Portland for weeks now, if not months, and up in Seattle, and things like this are starting to happen, repeatedly in Chicago and other major metropolitan areas on smaller scales up to this point, and it's a case of the illogical perspective or seeming the lack of logic in what's going on, right?
There's complete logic in it, though. The thing is that I want to give you a moment, but let me just sting this in here real quick. There's complete logic in it. The problem is you're trying to look at the logic on the individual level. The logic doesn't exist on the individual level. The individual is a cell in a multicellular organism, and the logic's at the level of that multicellular organism, not at the individual. But that's all I'll say about that for this moment. But go ahead.
Right, and I was trying to make the point that it appears illogical from my observation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are, again, going back to your initial comments, that we all have to process all the things, all the inputs, and all the stimuli that are around us into our psyche, and then into our choices and behaviors and actions and beliefs and points of view and such. And so, I admit that that's what I'm doing in this situation. It certainly is filtered. The information or the facts are filtered by my perceptions and my understandings and my values and things of that sort. And that's where the conclusion of that it's not logical, because the outcomes that I believe are logical or certainly almost assured are not anything that I think that a enlightened person would seek, right? They would not want to have things limited. So anyway, and I'm deviating quite a bit from social media, but I think this is how I think some of the things we talked about last time, they're manifesting themselves. I think there is logic in that social media is certainly a vehicle for enablement, a vehicle for quick communication, for proliferating recruitment and things of that sort.
It's a different way. You're thinking about it too basically. That's not what it is. So this, let me fast forward to my thesis about the ill of social media, because everybody tells us, oh, social media is messing with humans, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. No, your scope is wrong. Your scope is so out of bounds about from my perspective, what's actually going on, that you're irrelevant. And I think that there's a lot of unfortunate nature in that scope so out of bounds. And so my mission here, at least in this conversation, is try to pull it back to where I think the bounds are, which is that the ill of social media, the scary part about social media is not that, it dehumanizes us, makes us lose contact. This, that, or the other. Because I think that there's so many positives on the other side of it that it's worth those things. Even if it's true, I don't think that it's fully true, but even if it were fully true, I think it's worth those things because the positives, the upside of it is so big. It's so big that it's worth accepting that. So that's not a very conservative perspective. I understand that, but I'm not a totally conservative person. I never claimed to be. But here's where I think the real problem is that the way that it's playing out right now is, and this goes back to my the person's a cell in a multicellular organism. Social media is the nervous system of this organism. So social media is being used to program every single individual cell with how to lockstep get together and do the thing, right? And it's doing it using well-known psychological techniques, almost like hypnotizing people. Not really hypnotizing, but just not in the ridiculous sense of hypnotizing, in the actual sense of hypnotizing, where you pump something into somebody over and over and over and over, and they will start acting on that. Right? That's what's happening, and that's what's really problematic with social media, is that it can be used that way, and it is being used that way. And that, combined with the fact that the people who control it, and people who are banning people off the platform, who are censoring the platform, and who are deciding who has the voices on the platform, they have the control about who gets programmed and how they get programmed. That is the scary as hell part about it. It's literally scary to me. Like, I think that it's overcomable, and I don't think that it's total. I don't think it's even close to total. That's the redeeming part to me, is that the upside to social media is so good, in the grip that this organism has on social media as a programming mechanism is so far from total still, that I think that there's lots of hope for it eroding, because you're going to have generations of younger and younger individuals whose literal whole life is going to be on social media from the day one that they were able to. And you probably already have some of those people now, but you certainly will over the next decade, right, that are really coming into their own. And those kids are going to hate this big gargantuan thing, because they're going to understand how much there is to life. They're going to understand how much they can be and achieve, and how many different things they can be interested in, and how much they don't have to fall in lockstep with any certain way of doing things. And the more people that are like that, the more people are going to reject this whole, groupist mindset, collectivist mindset, which is really what this is, right? In some manners, it's really funny because it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different things, and that's just kind of part of it. But anyway, so I think there's a lot of positive upside here. I think there's a lot of optimism to be had, but we're talking about the negative parts of it. I think very few people understand how catastrophically horrible things could go if that mechanism were to become total on social media generally, and just basically it's going to make your kids into whatever it wants. It doesn't matter what you want your kids to be, that sort of a thing. That's what it's going to be. Anyway, I'm like 2 inches from conspiracy theory, I understand, but all you have to do is look at it. It's the facts. You can prove that what I'm saying is true.
Sure. I think the whole thing about the control of the information and the control of the programming is I think pretty clear that's going on, right? I mean, with the amazing thing is that these large social media empires, or if you will, or machinery, they're given statutory protections by the government as media and journalism, yet they're fighting, and they're not held to the same account on federal laws and controls, from the standpoint of limiting people, and limiting free speech and filtering and things like that. That part is scary as well, right? Because that's how they can continue doing what they're doing and have the impact that you mentioned, that becomes now generational, and then beyond that becomes institutionalized, right? It becomes the norm rather than something that's happening, from outside the norm into the norm. It becomes the norm, and that is, I think, a manifestation of what you said that is scary to me, and I potentially could be the path to the destruction of humanity in total, into something I can't even imagine what it would be, but it wouldn't be anything like anything that I've ever witnessed, or I think we've ever witnessed, or anyone's ever witnessed in history of man so far, of mankind so far.
I think that ultimately all systems, all self-contained systems in this world can generally self-correct given enough time, and if they're not, just like wiped out with one blow, right? If like right, yeah, great example. Dinosaurs would still be with us today if there had not been an extinction level event, right? And so, barring any such event, everything's correctable. I think, and particularly with this, it's correctable because what will happen is, let's say that control becomes total on social media. Let's say that control becomes institutionalized, like you're speaking to. Let's say that becomes not just institutionalized, but canonicalized, meaning that it becomes tradition. And so, at some point that might happen, right? Because if it becomes institutionalized, it has the potential to become canonicalized, or canonized. I don't know, whatever. It becomes the canon. And then 100 years after it becomes canon, 200 years after it becomes canon, let's say it makes it that far. What's the end game if you play all of this out, right? History tells us that all that happens is there's a class of elite rulers, and then everybody else dies. Over time, everybody else dies. Okay, sure, that sucks. That's really bad, and I don't want that to happen, and I really hope that we can avoid that outcome. But let's just play it out. Let's just say that happens, and then over time, everybody dies. Well, then what happens? The elite class shrinks. At some point, they're going to be like, this is a sinking ship. We've got to do something different. And so then they will either sink, and it will be the end of humanity, like you're speaking of, or they'll figure it out. And I think that at some point, you're going to get one guy that's really smart, and he's going to be like, forget all y'all. I'm going to go do this. Here's my plan. Who wants to come with me? And they're not going to go kill him. And if they kill him, then he's probably smart enough to understand that to see the writing on the wall that they're going to try to kill him and bring people to protect himself. Because it's like, then you become literally ruler of the world at that point. But it's a small world. It's a much smaller world. But then there's the possibility for the cycle to begin again.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned before that in my undergraduate degree, I took more coursework and had more studies in sociology than I did in what my actual degree was in.
Yeah.
But it was relevant. I mean, it was relevant. It wasn't like it was different. It was a criminal justice degree, and sociology is certainly very, very relevant to criminal justice. But one of the theories that I recall very, very plainly, and I've kept it, in my thinking. All my entire life since I've gotten out of college, and that is social history, not just social history, but history has shown, and time and time again, that there's a cycle that societies and cultures go through, and that is, the haves rise up to power and authority, and the have-nots, because they're a larger group, tend to band together at some point in time, and they overtake the haves. So the have-nots rise up against the haves, and then out of that comes a new group of haves, right? Because those of the have-nots, out of the result of lots of things, not the least of which is human ego, human desire, human selfishness. There will be those that rise up, and there will also be those that rise up appropriately and organically and by the will of the group, right? To be the leaders. They establish themselves and they're embraced or accepted or put forth as the leaders, and they in turn become the haves just out of circumstance, and some out of design, some out of circumstance, and then that cycle begins once again. And I think the current Western world society, the developed part of our world, has been trying to stave off that, not from protecting the haves per se, but to create an equilibrium and a homeostasis where it all works, right? It doesn't that there's enough of a balance and a avenue and a path from the have-nots into the haves, by your own, individual efforts and successes, that would, sort of keep that, by way of having that highway of ascension. It also is a highway of dissension, which, history shows that has occurred, right? There have been those extremely powerful and rich individuals that are part of the haves that lose it for whatever reason through, whatever kinds of events that occur. I wonder, with that as a context for this real simple, short question, I wonder, is what we're witnessing now in the world, and especially in the United States, most clearly. An example of a group of have-nots, and it's different. It's not the oppressed per se. It's not just. Maybe there are some that are oppressed, some that are destitute, some that are in dire material and physical situations. Are they rising up against those that they deem to be the haves in some fashion, right? And maybe it's power, maybe it's material, maybe it's wealth, maybe it's perception. And I think this goes back to the thing about the emotion. And I think some of the points and situations that a lot of legitimate, peaceful demonstrations and protests have been occurring for, the lowercase b Black Lives Matter versus the organization. I'm not speaking of the organization, but they're protesting about their perception or belief or understanding of inequities and unfair treatment. I don't begrudge anyone, regardless what color, what circumstance, what situation. If they feel an injustice, they have the right to raise that injustice up, to be spoken to and addressed and what all. But when it is that in quote unquote injustice is a perceived rather than fact, it's an emotion based on a historical thing rather than a factual thing. When I say historical, I think especially with the racial situation, that's the one that's the clearest and easiest to speak toward, the whole issue of slavery. And it's probably one of the most horrendous parts of history in our country, in the United States, but it exists around the world. So it's not like the United States has a corner on slavery, but it was a horrendous thing. I personally never did anything, had nothing to do with slavery, and think that I'm appalled by the thought of how the slaves were treated and treated, physically treated and emotionally mistreated and physically mistreated. It's appalling to think that any human being would want to do that to another human being is just beyond my comprehension. But there's still such strong emotion about from that history, and that's been 150 years ago that it was abolished. And I got it. There were a lot of civil rights things that issues and limitations that continued post the abolition of slavery, and I understand that. I'm not trying to discount that, but I think I've heard this many times recently. The whole idea of emotionalizing that versus factualizing it, and finding some way that people can, in a civil society, agree that there are certain things that are facts, and that the emotions around those facts are real too. But you can't act on emotions. You have to act on the information and the facts. Because if you act just on emotion, the only other outcome is that someone else is now dealt with in an unfair and unjust manner, and they become emotional about it. So it becomes an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And I think someone wisely, much more wise than me, much wiser than me, said one point in time, too much eye for an eye ends up and everybody's blind. And so we have to be careful that we can't. This is mutual destruction. Not the fear of mutual destruction, but mutual destruction means everybody's destroyed. And I think my fear is, and that's sort of where we talked about some of the circumstances that potentially could occur, could happen, the outcomes sort of sound like that's a potential path. So how do we get off that path? How can as a humanity, as a society, how can we get off that path?
We can't. No, so that's the wrong question. That's that's such the, and I don't mean to disrespect you by saying this. That question is exactly, you asking that question in that way is exactly why we can't. Think about the question you just asked.
I just said, what can humanity or society do to get off that path?
Right. What can we do as a collective do to get collectively off this path? You can't. That's the problem, is this collective mentality about everything, that we have to be beholden to each other in that way, that we have to be responsible for everybody else in that way. Now, I'm not saying let's not take responsibility for those that we can and have reason to and want to show that love, want to show that support, our family, our friends, our community, the person down the street who's hungry and you can help feed them. If they need a place to stay, you can help them have a place to stay for a while. I mean, that's the stuff that we need. We have to individualize the issues, not collectivize the issues. So that question in and of itself is the reason why there's a little tongue in cheek, but the reason why I say that is that's from a collective perspective. That's the wrong question to ask. The question is, what can I do? And everybody has to ask and answer that question. What can I do? And then not only answer it, but do that thing and those things. That's the thing. And so few people are willing to do that I think that really getting off the path is a hard road to hoe. But I want to pivot back a little bit and talk a bit about what you were speaking of with regards to, the emotionalization versus the rationalization. Because we have to talk directly at the problem. And the problem, again, is the collective ideal. You are aiming this still at the individual, like the individual in those situations are going to make a change. They're not going to, because that's where they find themselves, is they have given themselves, their identity, everything about them, over to some collective. And they are nothing. Only the collective has power, not them, right? They are sitting in a position where they feel like they have been taken advantage of. Some have been taken advantage of, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about the ones who are in an irrational position, let's just say. And they are sitting where they feel like they've been taken advantage of, that they feel that they have no control. They feel they have no power. They feel they have no ability to move from where they are. They feel like they're so limited in their life that they have completely ceded that power to something else. And then along comes this ideal, this way of thinking about the world that says, hey, you know why you felt that way? That person took it from you. Let's come with us and we'll go and take it back from him. Right? That's all that it is. And I don't mean just money, right? I mean anything, opportunity, joy, happiness, love, anything. And that's just the wrong way to think about the world. But the problem is, it's not that these people have emotionally come to this conclusion. It's not that they, certainly not rationally, right? We've established that earlier in the conversation. But it's not even that they've emotionally come to this conclusion, which is slightly what you were hinting at. And I don't know if that's how you really think about it or feel about it, but they haven't emotionally come to this conclusion. There are pot stirrers. There are people who are intending, and that is their sole purpose, to make to froth all of this and foment all of this anger, resentment, hate, action, violence, etc., toward an entrenched system. But what's so funny is, and I want to try to tie this in real quickly with what you're talking about with the slavery and all that, and about how lamentable that was, and how there's problems even after we abolish slavery. All right, what's the source of that problem? What's the source of that problem? What do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the point, partly to the point I was saying earlier about emotions. People have. No.
I mean the slavery, and then all the things since then they're so lamentable about the history of the United States that you're talking about. Why did slavery exist in the United States? Why didn't people just why didn't the slaves just all up and just kill their masters and leave?
You tell me what you're after, because I'm not sure I understand.
They would get thrown in jail. It was illegal for them to do that. It was, one, legal for some humans to own other humans, and two, it was illegal for those other humans to not accept that lot in life, in that position in life. The only thing that was there making that happen was the law, quote unquote law, and the government that enforced it, and the thugs of that government that enforced it. And those are thugs enforcing slavery. And if anybody wants to say that somebody enforcing slavery is not a thug, come at me. But seriously, though, right? And so And I'm not going to be here and get on my stump about, the government's the source of all problems, right? But my point being is that, okay, let's just talk about abolition. That happened. Wonderful. Literally absolutely wonderful. I mean that genuinely, as genuinely as I can. Then Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws, not Jim Crow society, right? It's the laws, right? Society will change. And I'm not saying law drives society. Actually, quite reverse. Society doesn't even drive laws directly. Culture drives society. Society drives laws. Thus, culture drives laws. Thus, culture drives government. Thus, culture is the root of all the things that we need to change, we want to change, etc. You're not going to change it by getting on the stump about politics. You're not going to change it about getting on the stump about society. You're not going to do it about getting on the stump about, these darn kids today, right? You only are going to change things by meeting the culture where it's at, understanding the long game, and playing the long game. The problem is that the people who have, most recently, probably around, I guess, post-World War II, let's say, and until today, they understood that. And then they got in, and this whole pot stirring that's being done has been done very intelligently, very intentionally to seed itself into culture. And now what we're seeing is those seeds that were planted post-World War II are finally coming to fruition in politics in 2020. Well, not finally. I would, 2010, somewhere around then, is when it really started ramping up. And so this is a long game. So you're talking about a 60-year game, basically, that was played, and we're seeing the end game of it right now. Initial stages of the end game of it right now. And so my point being is that if we want to address this thing, two things we have to do. And I'm finally going to come to answer, I think, the question you wanted to ask me ultimately. There's two things we need to do. Three things. The first thing is the most difficult thing. Realize it's not going to happen in our lifetime. Period. It's just not, right? That's the patience point. You have to be patient. Two, you have to go where change is made. Remember, that's not in politics. That's not in society. It's in culture. You have to go to the culture. And three, you have to do everything you can as an individual to charge the people that you can talk to, the people you can affect, the people you can influence, the people you can convince. At the cultural level, you have to put every ounce of everything that you have into making that impact there and helping them understand the real message in a way that relates to them through the culture. And that it requires emotionalization. That's the hard part, right? You have to use those tactics because those are the only tactics that humans respond to organically, right? The logic of everything, that hits people like you and me real hard because you and I are logical people. We're an extremely small percentage of people. And I don't mean that we're better than people at all whatsoever. Quite the contrary, because it makes it hard for me. Particularly, it's harder for me to mesh in with other people. It makes my life harder in that sense. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love who I am and how I am. But the reality of it is we're such a small percentage of people that taking that tact will never work at societal levels, if that's what you're wanting to affect, at government levels or whatever large level you're wanting to affect. So you have to know that you can only make the impact that you can make individually with other people. One-on-one, one-on group, if you can get to a group that will, respect you in some way or care about what you have to say or doing. But that's what it has to be. That's where it has to go. I really believe that is literally the only way to change things.
That makes sense. I mean, what you just described in a certain way is the true definition or the definition of true leadership. Right? Leadership is not power and authority. It is the influence that comes when someone's looking at the long game, when they doing everything that they can individually do, right, to influence and achieve and accomplish, and then they influence those around them that they also have that power and ability to do the same. And typically, true leadership is not something someone seeks. It's something that they are. So I think I can maybe internalize and encapsulize what you just shared with that way for me. It is, and I certainly understand and agree with your characterization of I asked the wrong question, because it's the thought was my thought was, how can we make things better for everyone, right?
Sure.
And we can't. I can, you can, but we can only do what we can do. But if enough are connected in that fabric and are woven together in that fabric, that's where the impact begins to happen.
Here's the thing: is we can't save the world, right?
Right.
I'm gonna
Not for me.
I'm gonna go off the rails here, but I think it's important because it is so relevant to what we're talking about right now, and I won't take too long to talk about this. We can't save the world. Only the Christ figure can save the world. But the Christ figure is something that we all each individually have to embody, because only when we all individually embody that Christ figure will the world be saved. Until then, it's all lost. We can individually be saved. We can individually, come to understand truth. We can all individually, be pulled from being lost. But the only way that the world gets saved is that everyone adopts that approach. That's my perspective. That's my belief in life.
Amen, hallelujah, and preach on, brother, as they say down home. I think that's a fantastic point to wrap up our discussion today on. I really like where this conversation went. It got to some really deep meaning and pronouncements, and I look forward to where we can take it from here. I mean, I think there's still many points to discuss related to this, but I think they will all describe and ultimately come back to that last point you just made. I fully agree with that. So
we all have to pick up and bear our own cross.
Yeah, pretty amazing, and that doesn't necessarily speak to the differences in religions and belief and philosophy. It's about the story of man, right?
There's similar stories in all of those religions, though. That's the whole thing.
Sure.
It is a human thing. It is 100%
Right.
a human thing.
Yep, indeed. Well, I think that's a great discussion today. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Got a lot from it, and yet again, you said more than one thing profound today, and I appreciate so much your insights and the passion about your insights as well. So let's continue to do what we do. Let's continue to make the differences we can make, and let's continue to make the changes that we personally can make, and just see what we can affect as we go down the paths of our day-to-day lives. So
definitely seems like the right way to go.
Great. Yep, indeed. All right, Jordan, my friend, have a great one. Again, it's always good to get back together with you. And,
definitely.
We'll see you again next time.
All right, sounds good. See you, Doyle.